Okay, we're at the part of the presentation where we're going to build a podcast, or an example podcast I should say, and upload it to my Podomatic account. We'll start with Audacity, which I have open on my taskbar. Now there are some instructions that you can find on the web for Audacity, but there are really only a few things you truly have to know in order to use this great little piece of software. The first item that you want to be aware of is the selection tool. It looks like an I-beam. The next one would be an envelope. We're not going to utilize it here, but this allows you to fade your music or your voice, fade it out or fade it in, however you choose to use the tool. And finally is the time shift tool, which would allow you to move your audio track left or right depending on what you need to do. And this is often used when you're utilizing multiple tracks. In this example, I will only use one track. These buttons across the top look like your standard push buttons on a tape deck. You'll see play, record, pause, and stop. Again, this is just about everything you need to know to use this piece of software, although it does offer a wealth of other tools. Again, these are just the basics. So let's get started. I'm going to hit the record button and I'm going to go into my announcer voice. Hello, Shawn, or I should say hello, world. This is Shawn Wheeler, and this is Say It Again with Podcasting, or Say It Again, Improving Student Learning Through Podcasting would be a better way to say that. Now that I've said that, I'm going to stop that and show you just how easy it is to save this file as a project and then export it as an MP3, followed by uploading this file to Podomatic. With that, I'm Silly Shawn, and I'm gone. Alright, at this point I'll hit stop, and now I've got my file all taken care of, and you can see the little squiggly lines there. This is my voice. Now if I were going to do any manipulation to this, I want to treat this just like I would a digital video. I want to save my project, so I'll do that up under the file menu. I'll choose save project as, and I've got it going to my podcast folder, and I'm going to call this sample podcast. I will click save. Now this did not create my podcast. This is only my example file, or this is only my my file. I have not created the MP3 at this time. Next, I need to actually export this as an MP3 file. Now again, if I was going to do some multiple tracks or so forth, every time I'd want to make a change or edit, I'd want to save my file. Save my project, I should say. Next, I'm going to go ahead and export this as an MP3. And before I do that, I want to set my ID3 tags. So at this point, I'm going to go to Project, Edit ID3 tags. And if you're not familiar with an ID3 tag, this is the piece that goes into Windows Media Player or iTunes. It tells you the author's name and the band and so forth. So here I'm going to put what I call a sample podcast. The artist is Shawn Wheeler, and the album is Say It Again. And this will be track number 1, year 2007. And you'll notice there are a lot of different genres in here. Some I'm not even sure what they are. And I'm looking for speech, and it's down about 3/4 of the way, so I'll choose speech. And I'm going to not put any comments in at this time, so I'll click OK. Now, the ID3 tags are set. These are optional. However, if you don't set these, Audacity will give you an opportunity to set them when you create your MP3. So at this point, I have set my ID3 tags. I have made a change to the file, so I want to save my project again. And now I'm ready to export as an MP3. So I'll export as an MP3, and this is going to take just a moment. And it wants to name it sample podcast. I'm going to put an underscore in here just because I don't like spaces in my files. I'll click save. And there it is. It's rendered out. It is now an MP3 ready for me to utilize. And I will tell you this much: if this was a longer podcast, for example a 30-minute to a 60-minute, it can take as long as 15 minutes for the MP3 to render. So at this point I'm done with Audacity. I'm going to go ahead and close it, and I will open up my file where I saved that. And this is important for you to understand. Using Audacity, it will create 2 files plus a folder. So you'll see sample podcast data, you'll see the sample podcast project, and then you'll see a backup file of that project. Then when I exported it as an example podcast in the MP3 format, it created another folder, or I should say another file here, and this one is sample_podcast, which you saw me create just a moment ago. So at this point I'm done with my podcast, but it is not available for the world to see. So what I need to do is upload that, and in this example I'm going to use my Podomatic account, which I've already have opened up, and I've already signed in. So you can see this is my Podomatic site, and I want to upload a podcast. So I'll choose my podcasts, and I want to upload a podcast. So you'll see as I scroll down, I have the option to post a new episode, which I will click. And I can put a title, sample podcast, and I'm going to skip over the tags this time, and I'll put a brief comment in here. This is my sample podcast for my web-based presentation. All right. And I could add a picture if I chose to, but I really don't want to. And the next thing I want to do is import my MP3. So I will choose import. And sometimes you have to click this a second time. And now it says select a media or upload. So I will upload this. I will browse. This was in my documents folder under my podcasts. And there you see sample podcast just as we created. So I'll select it. I'll choose open. Now I've got it all set to go. And the last thing I need to do is post this episode, which I'll click on. And it will take just a moment for that to post. And what you'll see down at the bottom of the screen is it is posting. Actually, you see it up here. You can basically see it in two locations. When it's done, the page will reload. And I have the opportunity to share this with my friends who are subscribed to my podcast. I'm going to skip this for now. And I've got one more chance to tell the world about it. Again, I will skip this. And that's it. I am good to go. So here I'm going to click on my podcast page, and we'll see it live for the world to see. Notice my URL has changed to shawnwheeler.podomatic.com, and you can see here is my sample podcast, which I just loaded on July 4th at 10:11 p.m. Pretty slick, isn't it? I thought so. Alright, that wraps up the example podcast, or the sample podcast I should say, and I hope you enjoyed seeing just how easy this really is to do.